You want to open it?
Oh, always. Hello and welcome to Taming Your Inner Artist. I'm Sharon.
My name is Agata.
And we have a special guest who is, across the waves. Agata, please introduce, because this is your guest.
We have a great pleasure to have Cathering Gough-Brady with us today, who is in Australia, in Melbourne, if I'm not mistaken. Hello, Cathering.
Hello, yeah. Hello from Melbourne. It's got another name too. It's also called Naarm.
What? Why?
Yeah, Naarm is the First Nations name for
Oh,
the area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in First Nations, and so let's just go off topic already. So is it gaining some traction in terms of the way that different places are being kind of reversed to their traditional name? That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah, because I mean it's quite interesting because when the kind of Anglo-Celtic colonists came in, they renamed everything, of course,
yes,
as part of their process of kind of like, I don't know, exerting their will on the land, right? And now those names are coming back.
Yeah.
So when you start a radio show on our national broadcasters, they say, we're speaking from Melbourne, Naarm.
Nice.
Yeah.
I
It's
love
becoming part of the way people are thinking about, reinvigorating that knowledge and those names.
That's
back into
amazing.
contemporary culture.
Yeah.
And there's a whole campaign going on in Australia at the moment called The Voice,
Right.
where we're potentially recognising the First Nations people as having a kind of advisory role that's set in the Constitution, so that they can actually have a say on matters relating to policies that affect them.
Fantastic.
Oh my God, really?
I was going to say, yeah. Whoa, what is this crazy idea that people should have a say in where they live? Oh, that's because I think the thing is over here, we never have any idea about all the different things that are happening throughout the world. We're all very we're very fixed on our
yes, that's
really
sad,
great
that's
government
so
at the moment.
At the same time.
So it's still a little bit off topic, but not too much, because it's just stuff I've been researching right at the moment, because I'm thinking about my relationship to land, of course, right? And it's really complicated when you're a colonist or a kin with the colonists, right? So my great-great-grandfather was this guy called Sir Robert Hoddle, and he actually laid out and designed Melbourne.
We really have a special guest today.
Yeah. But what's also kind of, and I'm intrigued by these coincidences of words. So the device that surveyors used to use back then is called a chain.
Right.
So he literally chained the land.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So it's kind of
incredible.
like, yeah.
So how's that finding some shape within your work at the moment? Is that just some initial ideas that you're kind of thinking about, or have you started embarking on your relationship to the land?
Yeah. Kind of potted version of that, because this is stuff I've been kind of trying to think through over the last year or so.
Yeah.
Because, it's beyond, say, that notion of chaining the land. It's also this idea of the kind of myths that come with, in a sense, kin. So, my kin brought these myths from Europe, and there's a sense in which those myths have led to climate change.
Okay, yeah.
So if I go to the land and I want to use my kin's myths to interact with the land, that's kind of problematic, because that's the part of the problem that we're facing at the moment. That Australia isn't actually England or Ireland or somewhere in Europe, right? And what I've been thinking recently as a way through this, because it's an interesting kind of angst that a lot of Australians have when thinking about their relationship to land if they're not First Nations, is that in fact one of the myths that we have is that land is passive, that it's there for us to exert our will or not. But actually, land has its own identity.
Definitely.
So this can kind of speak through, no matter what myth you try and apply to it, whether it's chaining it or whether it's kind of interacting through kind of Bunjil, the eagle that helped make the land itself is going to speak back. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I took us into a kind of deep place very early.
I think that's a great place for us to go.
Before we continue, I just have to make a little disclaimer for our listeners, because I'm sitting in a very uncomfortable position right now, staring at my microphone and not being able to see Sharon, which is very, very uncomfortable, because I really find it difficult just not to have this feedback.
Scary, I was waiting for her to say.
And very difficult to actually see you, Catherine, as well. So if you sometimes don't hear me very well, that's me just twisting my neck, really. So I just wanted to say that. That's it.
Okay.
Are you done?
I am done.
Okay. Catherine, we jumped in, we introduced the podcast, we introduced you, but would you mind telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself? Whatever you would like to present as your potted history of academia and research and practice as research, and then we'll jump in with some questions and chat. Is that okay?
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, I spent most of my life making my money as a filmmaker. Okay, it's being a filmmaker, so sometimes I couldn't afford cheese, but it was kind of a pretty good life, right, on the whole. Then what happened is I realised I was getting a bit older, right? And I thought there's going to come a point where I just can't lug all this equipment around. And I've got to think about what will I do next, right? So I thought, well, maybe I should do a PhD and go into academia, because it seems like a kind of related field. And then COVID happened, and that kind of forced me, because I had a funding to develop a TV series on human relationships to environments, because I make TV series over the years for our national broadcaster in Australia called ABC TV, so a bit like the BBC. And then COVID happened and I couldn't do it. I was like, and if I can't make films, I couldn't make money. So I had to find another job. So I applied for jobs in academia. But I kind of want to step back a bit, because the process of doing the PhD, coming from years of working in the industry, was kind of fascinating, because, you have this sort of set of ways of viewing the world. So I came from non-fiction filmmaking, which was mainly broadcast documentaries. And so there's a particular kind of set of ideas and ethos and, even language that you use. And then I came into academia, and I was quite scared, because I hadn't been inside academia since, my early 20s, when I, done my undergrad degree. And I thought I was going to have to box myself up, right? Creative Catherine was going to have to go in this box so that I could just conform to this kind of academic idea of what I should be. And then it was just this wonderful thing. There's this guy, Agatha, you're having in one of your sessions, Craig Batty.
Yes.
Who was my supervisor, but also was teaching us sort of methodology at the beginning. And he came in and he introduced us all to creative practice methodology. And I was like, oh my God, right? I don't actually have to put myself in a box. It's so exciting, because all of this had kind of developed since, let's go back to the 90s when I was actually at uni. So, so that was great. Just to realize that you can be the artist and the academic, which is quite exciting. And the way I chose Craig to be my supervisor, it's kind of a little lovely story too. I was going around basically interviewing supervisors to see, where I would go. Yeah, I kind of worked out enough that you had to get along, right, with this person, that it was more than they had a good name for themselves. They actually had to be someone you could work with. And I came in and I sort of started talking about my idea, and he got out a piece of paper and he drew it. right? He just drew these boxes and this relationship between the boxes. And I went, yes, you're the one. Because there was something about that kind of visualization of the kind of tenuous ideas that I had, that he could immediately go, oh, right, yes, and kind of, in a sense, visualize what I was thinking. That I thought, yeah, absolutely, this is the person. So I think that whole process of interviewing the supervisors was key to starting that process, right? But also, like, there was one supervisor who I had later, because the other thing is you get many, right, in your degree.
Yes.
I don't know, how many do you have? I had 6.
Oh, wow.
Wow, supervisors for PhD, 2.
I think so. 2.
I had 2, yeah.
Well, I actually have 1.5, really.
Okay. Wow.
Which half?
Well, that's true. I actually probably have 5.5. That's always the one that doesn't
Half
really do the
means
job.
the second was just on paper, really.
Oh, I was going to say, so
Yeah.
just which half?
Yeah.
Which half did you have?
But my first
The
one,
not
and first and
caring
only one,
half.
was fantastic. So I guess I was well off,
Yeah.
and I was speaking with many people as you would normally. Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I collected them. So, but also they would move. So my first supervisor, unfortunately, had MS. So not Craig, another guy. And so he had to leave, but he stayed on, which was really lovely, just out of his own time. And then Craig moved unis. And so then I had to get another supervisor.
Oh, I see.
And then another one, you know what I mean? So you always had 2.
Yeah.
So actually, no, maybe it's only 4. I lie, it wasn't 6.
Still more than me.
Yeah. But I actually enjoyed having meetings with them all. I was
Yeah.
like, like the more ideas coming in, the better.
Yeah.
And they all had different skill sets.
Yes.
There was one who was just awesome at theory. Another one awesome at kind of saying, Catherine, you should be more focused and stop flishing about, and
Yeah.
the sort of different energies they had. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think you actually mentioned a couple of things we probably wanted to ask you about anyway, which is, first of all, I would like to start, if that's okay with you, with this move from industry practice to academia. And you described really nicely how Craig introduced you to the idea of methodologies and things like that. But was it a big shift for you?
Yeah. So then what happened was that Craig, I don't even think I've been confirmed at this stage, right? So it's like in maybe the first 6 months of my PhD, and Craig's always like, publish. So he was like, which is great. I actually enjoyed that. But he was like, oh, there's this conference happening. So it's like Almexa. It's called ASPRA.
Yes.
You should present a paper. I'm like, what? So I was like a bit scared. So I asked my mate, who'd also started a PhD around the same time, I'm like, do you want to co-present something? So that it's only 10 minutes that we have to each do. So that's kind of like not too bad to come up with something to say. And then I started to think about what to say. And I'm just not an in front of camera person. I'm like, I spent my whole career directing and filming and cutting and, like behind the camera. So the thought of standing up in front of like a group of people who would listen to this talk, and then that would be it, right? Like, that was the chance. If you stuffed it up, then, there is no more chance. That was the moment in time. And it just felt so ephemeral to me, and also felt so uncontrollable, right? So as a doco maker too, there's that sense in which nothing's ephemeral, nothing's uncontrollable. You can cut stuff, you can, it's like... So I just thought, this is a really daft idea. So what I did is I made filming the digital paper, because I thought, well, I'm a filmmaker. Why would I get up and rant in front of someone? Why wouldn't I actually make a film? And then I can press play and I don't have to like be in the moment and stuff it up. And also then it exists, right?
Fantastic.
As a thing. Yeah. So that's how I kind of started becoming involved in all of these sort of essay films, they kind of sit somewhere. They're not really videographic criticism. They're not pure creative practice. You know, they're sort of sitting in this sort of space somewhere between. And then I got onto Screenworks, and I was like, oh, because I asked my supervisors, I was like, what's the best place to publish? They're like, this one. So I'm like, okay. So I got onto them, and I'm like, do you reckon you'd be into this? And the next day, yes. So there begins my academic career.
Amazing.
So it was, so it was a shift of not just me adapting to it, but me also saying, nah, I'm not going to do the ephemeral thing.
Yeah,
I'm going to do this differently. Yeah. So bringing my kind of ways along with me as well. Yeah. And there's that space, right, in creative practice for it to allow for you to do that, to bring your existing practice along with you. Yeah.
I think, again, it's wonderful for another reason for me personally, because for many people who just go through their education and just go from their bachelor to master to PhD, they are used to the fact that in lower levels of education, you're basically being told what to do. And obviously with masters onwards, and more specifically with PhD, you actually have a lot of freedom. You have plenty of freedom to design and to do and decide what you do and how you do it. And of course, especially if you work with creative practice and filmmaking, I really love that story of you just decide, I'm just going to make a film instead. And you making your rules in any way. And I guess the challenge is, and this is where support, which we talked about with Sharon last week, and what you've mentioned in terms of having 4 or 6 supervisors and being able to ask them questions and having people with different kind of expertise is really useful, because then you have these ideas, you're not entirely sure if they maybe make sense or maybe if you should do things differently, but then you're surrounded by people who can support you and mentor you through that journey. And I think this is the beauty of being able to do exercise your freedom at the same time with the safety net of the experts which surround you. Would you agree that that's the case? And was it the case with you?
Yeah. So they were fantastic. I only had one supervisor who was kind of vacant as a, and that's not bad out of a whole team, right? That they definitely did. And alongside that, what also happened was that there was a few of us going through around the same time, and we formed a kind of mini lab in a way, right? Where we would get together, I don't know, maybe once a month, and watch a film and drink a bottle of wine and rave, or we'd read an article, and do the same and rave. So, it became this really nice also space in which idea sharing happened, and that's continued. Like that group of other PhD graduates, like we co-editing a book, and we found our old bios. The publisher has, they're like, do you want to update your bio? And the bio is like when we were babies, when we were in our PhDs, and we're all like, oh, here we are. And now we're all like off doing jobs and blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of, it was really great, I think, doing that thing of finding like-minded people as well as having that kind of team of the experts. So you could kind of experience ideas together, because there's something about, right, those research degrees where you feel like you're, completely at the bottom in terms of like expertise, but you're also at the forefront because you're the ones kind of thinking about the newest and latest ideas. So there's that interesting kind of, you're both, yeah.
I think that brings us to that. You brought up the point, Catherine, of the in-between. And that's something that Agatha's spoken quite a lot about in terms of being in between in terms of practice and theory, and being in between in terms of interdisciplinarity. So in terms of like your in between and what you think of the in between, where would you situate that? What do you think about the in between?
Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to think, because I've actually been thinking about it in terms of schism at the moment with that stuff relating to land and you know, but in terms of actually creativity, I suppose I want to start from a point by saying that I think it's perfectly natural for us as human beings to have opposing epistemologies existing within us at once, and that's what's great about creative practice is that it says that's not a problem, right? And so it's actually quite normal. So I don't have an issue with this idea of the schisms, but it definitely was a little bit of a fight at the beginning, you know, with me going, because people wanted to say, are you practice-led, or are you, there's, you know, all these terms, right? And everyone wanted to put you in a box, and I'm like, I'm both. And they're like, no, you can't be both. And then by the end of the PhD, they went, oh, yeah, you're both. So, you know, it's kind of like you can, in a sense, kind of break out of some of those boxes without necessarily leaving behind the idea that there is still this in-betweenness going on, right? It's kind of like slightly schismatic view. But I wonder if the tension that is interesting comes from that, right?
Yeah.
So that in that space, without it being one thing or the other thing necessarily, so it becomes a much more interesting and intriguing thing.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked quite a lot about, isn't it, in terms of that idea of staying in your box, which, you know, people kind of try to make you do quite a lot, and they try and say, well, you're this, aren't you? Aren't you? Yeah, stay there. So we've talked a lot about the in-betweenness of interdisciplinarity and the idea of like different concepts coming together. Now, I know you work with film mainly, but what do you think about, what are some of the challenges of working in an interdisciplinary way, do you think, in terms of practice as research? Because that's something that has come up with some of my colleagues talking about something very different. But we've been looking at how, you know, some of these tensions in interdisciplinarity and some of these kind of pulls of looking at one thing in one way, looking at something in another because you've got someone coming in from a different area or something like that. Is there something that you can kind of speak to in those kind of terms?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know that I've ever seen myself as interdisciplinary. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking as I'm closing programs because I realised my computer was making noises.
Oh. We can't hear it. It's fine.
Oh, that's good. Trying to stop all the, you know, alerts and stuff like that.
No.
Yeah, life is full of alerts. Yeah, I'm firmly based, like you say, with non-fiction narrative, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe, you know, I've worked in audio and I've worked in video, you know, so, but that's not really interdisciplinary, right? It's still within that same space. I think it's more, for me, the ways of thinking and looking. So as a practitioner, I wasn't very focused at all at understanding what I'm doing. You kind of just did it, right? Yeah. Whereas now I'm much more interested in that. I'm kind of deeply fascinated in it, to be honest. So it's almost like previously I would make things because I just had this great need to do it as well as to eat. But now I do it. I make projects so that I can analyse them, because if I don't make a project, I've got nothing to analyse, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of, but I don't necessarily see that as interdisciplinary. So I'm not sure I'm much good on that. What was the story that the person had, like?
Oh no, it's not sort of a massive. So it's kind of by the by, but I dabble in death studies, as we all do from time to time, and I'm editing a collection with some colleagues, and one of the questions that we had to answer was, you know, what are the difficulties of an interdisciplinary approach to looking at, in this case, death and the dead and the dying. And it was just a really interesting thing to take a step back and go, actually, yeah, this is something that we do actually have to think quite carefully about, and how different people will approach this subject from their different kind of spheres of knowledge and interest and kind of approaches. And it was just that, because you were talking about your research into the land and the ideas of our links to the land, I was thinking to someone I met yesterday who is interestingly also very much related to the way in which the sea in this case kind of affects us and brings in this kind of idea about, you know, life and death, and these, again, it's another death studies person, but that idea of kind of bringing in very much the geography of place and the idea of our relationship to place. I think for me that feels like an interdisciplinary kind of conceptualization of space, and I was just interested because I think
now I understand.
Well,
what you're
no,
saying.
I just think there's lots of different ways into it. So I see myself as sort of interdisciplinary, but mainly because of what I look at and more how I look at it, if that makes sense. So I think there's a bendability to that term.
I think I'm a cuckoo bird. Yeah, I think I would just go and sit myself in those spaces and pretend, you know what I mean, and just take. So, so, you know, that way, I think it comes from creative practice, that way where you sort of just steal, really, from other places. You go, that's an interesting idea, I'll use that. Yeah. And it's like it ends up in this kind of mottled space. Yeah. But I feel like you start to work out what will kind of marry with what you're doing and what won't. And so I find that it's like my friends' disciplines, you know, so my friends are cultural geography and anthropology and visual sociology. My not at all friends are studies, anything ending with the word studies. Oh, no, and also modern languages. For some reason, modern languages is in the friends. I have no idea why. Yeah, in Europe, it seems to be something that, and so there's the kind of sense in which, there's these approaches, and I've been thinking about it, and I think maybe one of the things we have more in common is interest in process, and a kind of field studies approach. Whereas studies is much more interested in kind of unraveling the artifact. Whereas to me, that's like, that's the last sentence of what I'm going to write. It's not the beginning sentence. Yeah.
I'd like to go back, if that's okay with you, Catherine, to kind of talk to you about process, unraveling the process. And I've mentioned to you before, one of my favorite pieces of your work are your two video papers, the one filmmaking, and the other one, Characters Interrupted, because you really look at the process of what this process of filming something is and how you construct the story. And we will, if that's okay with you, we'll probably add links to your work to our podcast notes. Sure. But would you like to talk to us a little bit about this reflective bit of your work and perhaps these two pieces of work and how you constructed art and what was your thinking behind it? Because I find these two pieces of work absolutely fascinating. I really do.
Yeah, okay. So with Characters Interrupted, it's like when you're filming, stuff happens, especially if you're filming on locations, right? And so it always interested me because it never ends up in the cut, because it's just not part of the story being told. And so when I had this chance to go back, and it was somewhat prompted by this just catastrophic interview with Stella Bruzzi, the film theorist. She was lovely, but the hotel we're in, the manager just decided at a certain point that he was going to kick us out. Oh. And so it was a battle of wills, right? It was the manager kicking us out and me going, nah, not till I get my Atmos. It's like, and you know, I might seem kind of submissive and nice, but if you don't let me get my Atmos, it's a whole nother story. This kind of thing went down, and I thought, this is really interesting, right? Because, and it's lovely, the original audio is lovely, but they decided potentially it was, unethical to share the original audio because it was this lovely exchange between me and this person. as, playing certain roles, him playing powerful manager, me trying submissive female, and then going to stubborn female. So that kind of reminded me about all of these moments, in a sense, that happen. And so, in a sense, that film is somewhat crafted around that bit of footage from Stella Abruzzi. And it was nice too, because it happened at a point where she was actually talking about something that was kind of relevant for the kind of filmic narrative. So I thought, this is nice. This whole idea, she was talking about the kind of filmmaker becoming present. And mostly she was talking about filmmakers who were in front of the camera. But, I was kind of behind, but part of the moment in that. And then the way I cut it together also was about making my editing really present. So there was a lot of jump cuts, so it was like the filmmaker's also evident there. And so that piece kind of evolved out of that. And I started thinking about, okay, well, what am I doing in filmmaking? Because there's a whole complexity of life, right? And, people like Ross Gibson, who's like an amazing theorist, I totally recommend reading his work. He talks about some of what we do, which is about kind of interacting with the complexity as an artwork and being able to delve into its kind of multifacetedness. But as a filmmaker, there's a sense also in which what I'm doing is I have to simplify it into a linear narrative. So the world can be eminently complex, but the film can't be. I have to make choices about, will this bit be included? Will I include that character, So, and those choices are often driven by plot, right? What is it or the themes, what is it you're actually exploring? And I had a recent piece, a documentary, my most recent one, it's the one I actually thought I'd go into my PhD and make, which is about this woman in Indonesia, who's Indonesian, that speaks Indonesian. So I thought, well, there's no way I'll ever sell that to an Australian broadcaster. So I should make it as my PhD. But then I got sidetracked by all the kind of essay films. And then it turned out a broadcaster in Australia did buy it. So I was like, okay. But in that film, I had to recut it, right, for the broadcaster, because I kind of created a sort of version out of the kind of post-PhD period. But it was not at all broadcast version. And in the recutting, what they wanted, of course, was a kind of hero's narrative where there's, something at stake. And by the end, it's resolved. And, it's like classic TV, right? And so in the process of doing that, of setting that up as a narrative, and the clear narrative for that was her work. So this woman, Bekti, works with scientists trying to help them engage with communities, and the communities engage with scientists so that they can reduce dengue fever, right? So there was a kind of slight progression, and we kind of made a bit of it in that storyline. But in the earlier version, there was quite a lot of her home life, because I also found that really deeply fascinating. And that was still, most of it was still in the final cut. But what had happened was that it had changed from being kind of nodal and important in the plot to kind of charming insights into Bekti's inner self, right? So it was no longer action. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like, so even, stuff can be in a film, and if it isn't about the plot, then it's not going to be a driving point of action, right? And I found that really fascinating, because if you go into those feminist analysis, right, Le Guin and people like that who are talking about different ways of telling stories that are not the hero's narrative, and how those stories can be about, and then the same thing happens the next day, which that home space, okay, maybe if you're the royal family, but for most of us, the home space is, it's pretty similar to the one you left and the one you come home to, right? So, I find it really deeply interesting, all of this stuff that goes on as you're constructing, because that's what we're doing, right? We're constructing these narratives, and what are we doing when we do that? And how is it kind of either working for or against dominant myths? How is it working for or against, conventions in filmmaking? All of these things,
It's because it's so fascinating how you talk about this. Again, I kind of want to go back to this shift and from coming from the industry into academia. And if you were to put yourself in your shoes when you were starting, is there any advice you would give to yourself to do things differently, to kind of ease into this academic life? And I guess the reason I'm asking is because of our audiences. So as we discussed very briefly before we officially started recording, we obviously want to support early careers, people coming from the industry, or perhaps not coming from the industry, but just wanting to use creative practice, film and other media to do research. And I think you've touched upon so many points in your fascinating talk here, because you talk about approaching stories in a different way. You talk about different ways of analyzing things really through filmmaking.
So my fear going in was, how can I stay interested in something for this length of time, right? I was like, because I was making a TV series in a year. So I was like, boom, 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 right? So this idea that I'd spend 3.5 years on one thing, I was like, okay. So I was worried about that. And then I also was really worried that I needed to have the theorist, right? So I had the kind of concept. I was going to explore, at that point, the creating of documentary character. And then I was like, but I don't have a theorist, And so I thought I had to have a theorist, and that turned out just to not be true. You start to find them as you read, right? Yeah. And then there are people, and there are people that suit different things, right? But the other things I wouldn't change, and one of the things I did is I took quite a bit of time over the application process. So it's probably different in different places, but what I was doing, you had to write a kind of written application which included, a short essay on what you were going to do and some other information. And so what I did is, after I did the interviews with supervisors, and I thoroughly recommend that, right? Because I kind of met some and went, yeah, not you. And I encountered a bit of sexism too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, why did you do a master's? It's like, I don't know if I can swear on this, but that's what I was thinking.
If you want, we can totally do that.
So then what I did is I wrote that document over a period of time. It was like months. So I put out the first version, which contained all my "who do you think you are? I already know what I'm doing" stuff, right? And then, I came back to it a few weeks later and I was like, I don't really need to say that. I'm over that kind of moment of kind of like, because there's a sense in which you feel like you need to assert your identity, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I showed it to these people who are going to be my supervisors, and they gave me feedback. And so it was kind of this process that took, I think it might have taken 6 months, where, I was working on other things at the time, but I just slowly created this opening document, right, which was to get me in. And they liked it so much by the end, it was actually one of their example documents for people to have a look at for applying. And then I got to my first meeting, right, with my supervisor, and they said, okay, so you want to do this thing about intersubjectivity? And I'm like, nah, that was just the document to get me in the door.
Oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh,
so, there's a sense in which you just got to treat it like that. Like, that's the thing that gets you in the door. And once you're in the door, then you can work out what you want to actually do. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh my God, I think that's the best advice. It would have only been crowned by you going, "Suckers! I want to do this." I think that's genuinely that's the best advice, because I think we get so caught. So we tend to supervise PhDs together. I'm her bridesmaid. She is the bride, and we go through that with our perspectives, don't we? It's this kind of big journey of writing this opus of why I should be allowed through these doors of knowledge, and what can I bring. And that's such good advice. It's like, get in. Now I'm going to do this thing that's just nothing to do with what I sort of... That's brilliant advice.
I think it comes, again, in our experience, I think, from young people's fear of, I have to design something really amazing and stick to it because someone told me it's good, because it got me into this, opportunity, really. And not being perhaps brave and courageous enough to be flexible and to really be creative and do things as you want them to happen. Really, I think that's what it is. Really, I don't know if that was your case entirely, but
because it's systems, right? And so
Absolutely.
you go, okay, this is what the system is. So as a filmmaker, you do the same thing. You kind of write something to get the funding grant, and what you're actually going to make will be vaguely that, but it will be this other thing too. And the same, like I didn't completely not do.
Yeah, of course, yes.
I mean, I don't know, if I went back and had a look at it, I'd probably go, okay. but it was kind of the document that was needed for that moment.
Yeah.
And I think also probably what people coming in don't realise is how much it's expected you will change, and if you don't, it's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we have that conversation as well, don't we? It's
we do.
I've got this question. It's like, yeah, great.
Yeah.
If that's the same thing that we end up with in 3 years, we're in trouble. That's a conversation we have. But I think it sounds like genuinely. So I was quite naive going into my PhD, but it sounds like you took a much more kind of thoughtful approach to getting into your PhD. And I wonder if part of that is that you were incredibly successful in your filmmaking, and you'd already had this sort of this career, and you knew where you wanted to be, and you had that, I know I can write a grant bid, and I know that I can kind of bend the grant bid then when I'm making what I've kind of proposed. And I think that's probably that idea of would you suggest to people that they do take a step away maybe from academia for a while, because we here it's very kind of treadmill, isn't it? At times it's bachelor's, master's, PhD.
I don't know that I can advise one way or the other is better or worse.
Yeah.
Right? But I think it's different. And I think you were very polite. I think I'd describe my tactic to get in quite mercenary.
No, I think it's brilliant.
I think it's just in film creative practice, there just are a few people coming in at the moment who've been out in the industry, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like in Australia, there's a few of us who've been out and doing stuff and then come back in more than there is the people who've gone straight through. They tend to be the studies people in Australia.
Yeah.
Because, there isn't really an out there in the industry job for studies people, right? So it's like that's their gig, right? Is to stay within the academy. And I think in a sense, a bit of our gig is to get out there and make stuff. And whether or not you do that outside of the academy or whether the academy becomes flexible enough for you to do it. But I do think that there's an imperative which is different, right, in the industry and the academy. In the industry, it's a lot harder to get a grant. It's a lot harder to get commissioned, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of a different, I think, relationship to the filmmaking as a result. So, like I said, I had to make films that made me money, right? So it meant I made broadcast documentaries.
Yeah.
Now I don't have to make films that make me money. So I'm making wildly experimental films, right? So, there is that kind of, it's not better or worse, but it's different.
Yeah.
And it's quite different. And I think to say it isn't is to gloss over that experience. And also there's just, there's a whole insecurity about being in the industry, right? And you have different sense of, in the industry, time management is so important, right? Because time is your money. But also you only work with people who are really good at their job.
Yeah.
So there are no assholes. There are no narcissists.
Yeah.
Because they don't get another gig.
Yes,
right?
of course.
Yeah. I mean, there still are, but you just don't work with them.
Yeah.
So, but the point is then there's expectation. You come back into academia and there isn't really that same everybody is super awesome at their job and wanting to make this project come to fruition. It's a whole lot of people with different levels of skills and abilities who are wanting to make their own shit come into fruition, right? So it's kind of quite a different kind of, it's not that cohesive space.
Yeah.
We're all bringing this project into space.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this different vibes in terms of these spaces. And I think it's interesting to experience the different vibes, right? But I don't think it's necessarily the only way to become an interesting filmmaker, right?
Yeah, no, of course. It's just, it's really interesting. I just feel like that really gave you the foundation to kind of, you know, I don't know that I'd have been as brave as you. Well, I know I wouldn't have been to go to a conference. I didn't do any conferences. But to also go, do you know what? Yeah, that's what you want me to do. Pff, not going to do that. I'm going to do something that's completely different and works for me. And I don't know that I'd have had the chutzpah to do that even. So I just feel like it's that being out in industry that's given you that.
Yeah, possibly.
I can do my own
that
thing.
Thing is like, oh, that's what you have to do, righto?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I think when someone passes you an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And to actually say no for no good reason, it's like, oh, why would you do that, right?
True.
If it's only your own fear, that's not a good reason. Yeah, there has to be another reason. Yeah.
No, absolutely fascinating. I think it was just really, really wonderful to hear you talk about all of this, and I think we've learned a lot. I'm sure it's not only our listeners, but I certainly have learned a lot from this, and it's really it's really, really lovely to hear some kind of very practical advices from your side. And I think if I was to summarize what this fascinating stories you had for us today, I would say just be brave, really. Do things you believe in, and don't take no. Don't accept no if you feel like you should say yes. And I think that was absolutely wonderful. I am aware, Catherine, that you just came back straight from work and you didn't have your dinner, so that's why I'm trying to slowly wrap it up for you. But I think it was just absolutely wonderful to have you here with us today, and hopefully we'll have more chances to go back to this conversation at some point. I don't know if you have any final questions, Sharon.
No, I'll just ask the one, because Agatha's decided to sum up what we've talked about today, but I'm going to ask you, what is your sort of one summation, your best advice for somebody who's going to go, do you know what, I'm going to give practice as research a go?
You shouldn't be looking for the answers. What you're actually looking for is the questions.
I'm making yes things with my wrist because this is what Agatha says every single flipping week. Wonderful. That is just the best amazing advice.
Yeah.
Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for moving time and space with us to make this happen. We really, really appreciate it. Yeah. And we hope it's been okay.
It's been lovely, thank you.
Yeah, it was a wonderful start of the day for us, so thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and of course we'll keep in touch, and we will post the links to your work in our podcast. So thank you so very much. Have a wonderful evening, and
take care. Lovely to meet you virtually. Bye.
Bye. Oh, that was amazing.
So hopefully Catherine manages to leave the Teams chat. I've just abandoned her in there.
You have just abandoned her.
I did. I just abandoned her. Yeah. Well, I figure she's a lady of knowledge and skill, and she will find her way out of the virtual prison that Teams can sometimes be.
She definitely is. And I think what we've achieved today with this podcast is we managed to get some kind of really honest advice and viewpoints.
Can I just say, I've never met Catherine before. You've virtually met Catherine before. My God, what an inspiring woman.
Yeah, she's a hero, absolutely.
I didn't want to gush while we were speaking because I felt I shouldn't really. But Catherine, you're amazing. And we think, oh my gosh, you're amazing.
Yes, no, Catherine is absolutely amazing. We should probably also plug a couple of other links to my conversations with Catherine. So there's an article Catherine wrote for a special issue on practice-based research I edited last year. And there's a seminar series with Catherine as well. So we'll make sure we include all of this. But yes, wonderful, wonderful talk today.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll whack all of that in the notes. So please, when we whack stuff in the notes, do visit it because we've popped it there for a reason, haven't we? And I'm going to go off and read the article as well because genuinely that was so inspiring and so interesting. So now I've gushed and Agatha's listened to... That sounds disgusting. But I don't care. Now I've gushed and Agatha has listened to me gush.
This sounds so wrong.
Yeah, but that's, that's how we end our podcast.
It's still very early in the morning here. I have to say, it's still before 9.
Oh, dear.
I just wanted to say it's also very nice for us to start our international
It
part
really
of the
is,
podcast this way.
So we are going to continue this. Now Catherine has sort of been our little kind of guinea pig test run because we really, really wanted to speak to her. So we maybe jumped into the whole, transmitting across the waves thing a bit quickly. But we're going to have some really brilliant guests actually from across the oceans and seas. Zane Forshee is going to be joining us in a few weeks' time, and your contributor to the latest of your research series will be joining us as well.
Oh yeah, covers, yes.
Oh my! The faces that Agatha was making at me then, like I had gone crazy.
No, it's. I still didn't have enough coffee.
She's only had half a flask of coffee, and she is not feeling it today. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this up. But I'm just going to thank Catherine again for being such a generous guest. And it's goodbye from me,
and goodbye from
you,
and goodbye from me.
Yay!
Yay!
Bye.
Have a good day.